Picture this. It's 1977. A Soviet archaeologist named Sergei Rudenko is standing inside a frozen tomb in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The tomb has been sealed in permafrost for over 2,000 years. The air inside is so cold it has preserved everything. The wood, the leather, the fabric, all of it intact. Like a time capsule no one was supposed to open. And sitting in the corner of this tomb, perfectly preserved, is a small copper bowl. Inside the bowl, charred stones and seeds. Seeds from a cannabis plant, not wild cannabis. Not something that blew in by accident. The chemical fingerprint shows unusually high THC content. Somebody, 2,000 years ago, had specifically selected the strongest cannabis they could find and placed it inside this tomb, like it was the most important thing a dead person could possibly need on the other side. He wasn't the first. He wasn't the last. And the story of how that bowl got there, how smoke became one of the oldest human behaviors on the planet, is genuinely one of the strangest things I have ever looked into. Because here is what nobody puts in the headline. Smoking doesn't start with tobacco. It doesn't start with cigarettes or colonial trade routes or any of the things we normally associate with it. The story starts with your brain. And the fact is, your brain was built, long before any of this, to want exactly what smoke delivers. Let's go back further, a lot further. The oldest confirmed evidence of humans using controlled fire dates to roughly 1 million years ago. A cave in South Africa called Wonderwork Cave. Archaeologists found burnt plant ash and charred animal bone that could not have come from a wildfire. This was a contained, deliberate fire built and maintained inside a cave, 1 million years ago. The creatures sitting around that fire were not technically us. That was Homo erectus, our earlier cousin, smaller brain, heavier brow, absolutely no concept of what he was about to accidentally start. But he sat around fire every single day. And every single day, for hundreds of thousands of years, he breathed smoke. Not because he chose it, because it was just the air. Here is the thing though. Not all smoke is the same. When organic matter burns, you do not just get carbon dioxide and water vapor. You get a chemical cocktail that depends entirely on what is burning. And some plants, when they catch fire, release psychoactive compounds. Alkaloids, terpenes, molecules that interact with the human nervous system in ways that are, let's say, noticeable. In other words, at some point, sitting around a prehistoric campfire, one of your ancestors had a very unexpectedly excellent evening, and had absolutely no idea why. This is not a fringe theory. Researchers have proposed for decades that early humans living in forested environments across Africa, Europe, and Asia would have been regularly exposed to the smoke of psychoactive plants. Cannabis grows wild across large parts of the ancient world. So do Nicotiana species, wild relatives of tobacco. So do dozens of other plants with compounds that do interesting things to a primate nervous system when inhaled. The smoke was everywhere. The plants were everywhere. The accidental exposure was inevitable. But here is where it gets genuinely strange. Your brain was already waiting for it. The human brain contains something called the endocannabinoid system. It is a network of receptors that regulates mood, memory, appetite, pain response, and a handful of other essential functions. This system did not evolve because of cannabis. It evolved long before any human ever touched the plant. It is part of your basic biological architecture. But the reason this matters is that cannabis produces chemical compounds that fit almost perfectly into those receptors, like a spare key to a lock that was already built into your brain before you were born. So when the first human being inhaled smoke from a burning cannabis plant, whether it was an accident around a campfire or something more deliberate, their brain did not panic. Their brain did not reject it. Their brain said something closer to, "Oh, hello. I have been waiting for you." That moment, that first accidental hit of psychoactive smoke somewhere in the ancient world, that might be where this entire story actually begins. Not a decision, not a plan. Just a very pleasant accident that got repeated often enough that someone eventually thought to recreate it on purpose. Think about what you are holding when you understand that. The entire global tobacco industry, worth over $800 billion. Centuries of ritual, thousands of years of shamanic tradition, medical practices dating back before written language, social customs that span every civilization on Earth. All of it may trace back to a tired hunter sitting downwind of the wrong bush and having a genuinely great evening that he could not explain but absolutely remembered. History is sometimes beautiful in the most absurd ways. Now let's talk about what the archaeology can actually prove. In 2021, a researcher named Darren Duke published a paper that quietly rewrote the timeline of human drug use. Duke and his team had been excavating a site in the Great Salt Lake Desert of Utah, a place they nicknamed the Wishbone site. After the duck wishbones they kept finding scattered in the ash, the site was 12,300 years old, built at the very end of the last ice age, by hunters who lived in a landscape that looked nothing like Utah today. Back then it was a cold, wet marshland, full of birds, wildlife, and people who were figuring out how to survive the end of a glacial period. Inside the ashes of their fire, alongside stone tools and animal bones, the team found 4 charred seeds of Nicotiana attenuata, wild desert tobacco. Until that paper, the oldest confirmed evidence of tobacco use anywhere on Earth was around 3,300 years old. A pipe found in Alabama. Duke had just pushed the history of tobacco back by 9,000 years in a single excavation. Now here's the part that does not get enough attention. Those seeds were not scattered randomly. They were concentrated, present in a quantity and arrangement that strongly suggest deliberate placement. These were not seeds that blew into the fire. Someone carried them there. Someone put them in. We cannot say with total certainty whether they smoked them, chewed them, brewed them, or simply breathed the smoke off the burning hearth. What we can say is that 12,300 years ago, before agriculture, before pottery, before any civilization you have ever learned about in school, somebody knew what that plant was. And they wanted it near their fire. That is one of the oldest deliberate cultural behaviors we have ever found physical evidence of. But here is the question that should be sitting at the back of your mind right now. Does the absence of older physical evidence mean it did not happen earlier? Or does it just mean we have not found it yet? Organic material almost never survives thousands of years in the ground. Stone tools from 3 million years ago survive because stone is essentially indestructible. But a leather pouch full of dried herbs? Gone in a few centuries under normal burial conditions. A wooden pipe dissolved back into the earth long before any archaeologist showed up with a trowel. The absence of evidence here is absolutely not the evidence of absence. Not even close. Now, I need to tell you about a man who got called a liar for about 2,000 years, and then got proven completely right by a Soviet archaeologist digging up a frozen tomb. In the 5th century BC, a Greek historian named Herodotus traveled extensively through Central Asia and wrote down everything he saw. In his histories, he describes a group of nomadic warriors called the Scythians performing a funeral ritual, unlike anything the Greeks had ever encountered. After burying their dead, he wrote, the Scythians would erect small felt tents supported by wooden poles. Inside the tent, they would place a copper brazier full of red-hot stones. Then they would throw fistfuls of hemp seeds onto those stones. The seeds would smoke and burn. The Scythians would close themselves inside the tent, breathe in everything that came off those stones, and in his exact words, howl with pleasure. For roughly 2,500 years, Western historians assumed he was exaggerating, making things up, doing what they assumed ancient historians did, telling a good story at the expense of accuracy. Then archaeologists started excavating Scythian burial mounds. They found copper braziers. They found heated stones. They found hemp residue and cannabis seeds. Exactly what Herodotus described. The man was not exaggerating. If anything, and this is what gets me, he was underselling it, because in 2019, a team of archaeologists working at a burial site called Jerzonkel Cemetery in the Pamir Mountains of western China found something even more remarkable. They excavated 8 tombs from around 500 BC. Inside, they found wooden braziers that still contained chemical residues. Analysis revealed unmistakable traces of cannabis, but not ordinary cannabis. The chemical fingerprint showed extremely elevated THC levels, far higher than wild cannabis plants in the region produce naturally. The people burying their dead in the Pamir Mountains in 500 BC were not just using whatever grew nearby. They were deliberately selecting and almost certainly cultivating cannabis for potency. They wanted the strong stuff, and they knew how to get it. This is the oldest direct chemical evidence of psychoactive cannabis use anywhere in the world. And it was found inside a funeral ritual, which tells you everything about what smoke meant to these people. Here is what smoking meant before it meant anything like what it means today. In ancient India, one of the oldest medical systems ever documented describes a practice called dhumpana. The word translates literally to smoke drinking. Detailed texts, some over 3,000 years old, describe specific herbs, specific conditions, specific pipe designs, and specific protocols for inhaled medicine. This was not improvised. It was a sophisticated medical system with centuries of refinement behind it. Across ancient China, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, in virtually every early civilization on record, There is evidence of people deliberately inhaling smoke as a recognized medical practice. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents in existence, dating to ancient Egypt around 1550 BC, describes the inhalation of heated herbs to treat conditions of the throat and lungs. From a modern perspective, that sounds insane. You treated a lung condition by inhaling smoke? But stay with it for a moment. The specific plants they used had genuine pharmacological properties when inhaled. The ancient logic was actually consistent. Smoke reaches the lungs directly, so if the plant has medicinal value, inhaling it delivers that value straight to where it is needed. We still do this. Asthma inhalers, anesthetic gases, nebulizers, the delivery mechanism survived. The burning part mostly did not. Now move to the Americas. Tobacco is native to the Americas, which means Europe, Africa, and Asia had zero knowledge of it until contact in the late 1400s. But in the Americas, tobacco had been sacred for a very long time before that. For the Maya, who built one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history, across what is now Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize, tobacco was not a habit. It was a sacrament. Chemical analysis of ancient Maya ceramic containers has found nicotine residue inside vessels that were placed in ceremonial caches. Shamans blew tobacco smoke onto sick people to drive out illness. Smoke was understood as a bridge, a living carrier that traveled between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Prayers went up with the smoke. Visions came back down. In indigenous tribes across North and South America, blowing smoke on someone was an act of blessing, a gesture of profound respect. The idea of lighting up casually on a lunch break would have been completely incomprehensible to these people. When something is sacred, genuinely, structurally sacred, you treat it accordingly. And then there is a group of people in the Congo whose story sounds made up, but is completely documented. A warlike tribe came into contact with cannabis and did something nobody expected. They stopped fighting. They reorganized their entire society around the plant. They renamed themselves the Bena Riamba, the Sons of Hemp. They named their territory Lubuku, which means friendship, and their greeting to each other became a single word, moyo, which simultaneously meant hemp and life. One word for both things. Because to them, there was no difference. A tribe that chose a plant over war and built a culture of friendship around it. That is not a cautionary tale. That is one of the more interesting choices any group of humans has ever made. But here is the thing that makes all of this bigger than just a history of smoking. In the 1980s, a researcher named Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist at UCLA, proposed something that the academic world found genuinely uncomfortable. He argued that the pursuit of intoxication is not a social problem, or a moral failing, or an accident of modernity. He argued it is a biological drive, as fundamental as hunger, thirst, or sex, hardwired into animal behavior across species, not just human behavior. Animal behavior, elephants in Africa deliberately seek out fermented marula fruit. They will travel significant distances specifically to find it in the right stage of fermentation. Cats respond to catnip in ways that are neurologically identical to how they respond to certain pheromones. Reindeer in Siberia eat Amanita muscaria mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, and then drink the urine of other reindeer who ate them because the psychoactive compounds pass through the body intact. Reindeer have developed a system of drug recycling in the Arctic tundra. Honestly, respect. The point is this. If the drive to alter consciousness shows up independently across dozens of unrelated species, if elephants are seeking fermented fruit and reindeer are recycling psychedelic compounds, then this is not a human weakness. This is not a cultural accident. This is something built into animal biology at a level far deeper than civilization. And if that is true, then the question is not why did ancient humans start smoking? The question is, given that the drive was already there, given that psychoactive plants were growing wild across the ancient world, given that fire brought humans into contact with those plants every single day, how long did it actually take for the behavior to become intentional? The honest answer is probably much, much longer ago than any artifact we have ever found. Now, I want to tell you about a man named Rodrigo de Jerez. In October of 1492, Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean. He sent two of his crew inland to explore Cuba. One of them was Rodrigo de Jerez. A few days later, Rodrigo came back to the ships and described something none of the Spaniards had ever seen. The local Taino people took dried leaves from a specific plant, wrapped them in other leaves, lit one end, and breathed the smoke in through their mouths. Rodrigo had tried it. He became the first European in recorded history to smoke tobacco. He brought the plant and the habit back to Spain with him. He smoked publicly in his village in Andalusia. His neighbors reported him to the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition concluded that only the devil could possibly cause a human being to exhale smoke from their mouth and nose. Rodrigo was arrested for sorcery. He spent 7 years in prison. By the time he was released, all of Spain was smoking. That is the speed at which tobacco moved through Europe. Within decades of Columbus, it had gone from an exotic curiosity to a continental obsession. Within a century, it was being grown on 3 continents. In 1612, the shogun of Japan banned smoking. People kept smoking. In 1634, the Russian Tsar Mikhail Romanov ordered that anyone caught smoking should have their nose cut off. People kept smoking. By the early 1900s, the industrially manufactured cigarette had been invented, cheaper, more convenient, and specifically engineered to deliver nicotine faster and harder than anything before it. What had taken indigenous Americans thousands of years to incorporate into a measured, ritualistic, deeply meaningful practice was turned into a mass-market consumer product within 4 centuries. And then the tobacco industry of the 20th century did something that belongs in its own category of human behavior. Their own scientists, working internally, compiled evidence that cigarettes caused cancer. Not suspicions. Evidence. The industry did not publish it. They suppressed it. They marketed cigarettes to children. They hired doctors to endorse their products in medical journals and on television. They added chemical compounds specifically engineered to make nicotine hit faster and leave the system more quickly, maximizing the speed and intensity of addiction on purpose, not as a side effect, as a design choice. The total death toll attributed to tobacco in the 20th century alone is estimated at around 100 million people, more than every war fought during the same 100 years combined. A shaman in 500 BC placing carefully selected cannabis on hot stones in a funeral ritual was working with smoke. A tobacco industry executive in 1960 signing off on marketing cigarettes to teenagers was also working with smoke. These 2 people have almost nothing else in common. The distance between them is one of the larger moral chasms in the entire human story. So, when did ancient humans start smoking? The physical evidence takes us back 12,300 years with real confidence. The behavioral drive underneath it, the desire to alter consciousness, to share a ritual experience, to use inhaled substances as medicine, to find the plants that do something interesting to the mind, is almost certainly older than any artifact we have ever found. It may be as old as fire itself, but here is what I actually want you to take from this. You have felt something in your life that you could not fully explain. A craving, an urge to take the edge off, a pull towards something that changes your state, coffee, a drink, a cigarette, something. And at some point, you probably wondered if that meant something was wrong with you, if it was a weakness, a flaw, something to be ashamed of. It is none of those things. That pull is one of the oldest biological drives in the human animal. It predates agriculture. It predates civilization. It predates language. Your ancestors felt it 300 years ago sitting around a fire in a Utah marshland at the end of the Ice Age. The Scythian warrior felt it crouching in a felt tent on the steppe, howling with pleasure. The Maya shaman felt it blowing smoke onto a sick child in the highlands of Guatemala. They did not have corner stores. They did not have rolling papers or vape pens or an industry specifically engineered to sell them the feeling. They had fire and plants and a brain that already had the receptors built in. What changed is not the drive. What changed is who got to profit from it. For most of human history, the smoke was sacred. It was medicine. It was social infrastructure. It was how you built the kind of trust that let you go into dangerous situations with other people and come back alive. It belonged to the ritual. And when the ritual ended, the smoke ended. We took that ancient drive, that biological fourth force running alongside hunger, thirst, and everything else, and we put it inside a product. We industrialized it. We made it private and lonely and daily and addictive in a way that no shaman ever intended. The plant has not changed. The smoke is the same smoke that filled a Scythian tent 2,500 years ago. The drive is the same drive that moved a hunter to carry tobacco seeds to a fire at the end of the Ice Age. What changed was what we built around it. And the uncomfortable part, the part that actually lands on you, is that the next time you feel that pull, that urge to take the edge off, that need for something to shift, that is not modern weakness speaking. That is 100,000 years of human biology doing exactly what it was always going to do. It was just waiting for someone to put it in a package and sell it back to you. If this video made you think about something differently, that is what this channel is here for. Every single week, we go back into human history to find the things that explain why you are the way you are right now. Subscribe if you want to keep finding them. And if you have a friend who thinks their habits are entirely their own idea, send them this. They will find it interesting.